He was already dead. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people use that word when they mean someone looked terrible or seemed beyond help. The doctor who examined Beck Weathers on the morning of May 11, 1996, had seen enough death to know the difference. He pressed 2 fingers to Beck's neck. He checked for breath. He looked at the man's face, gray, crusted with ice, still as stone, and made the only determination the evidence supported. Beck Weathers was dead. The doctor marked his position, turned around, and walked back to camp. Beck Weathers was not dead. He was lying face down in the snow at 8,000 meters above sea level, in temperatures that had dropped to -40 degrees Celsius, with no supplemental oxygen. One hand frozen solid to the wrist, no shelter, no equipment, and no one coming back for him. He had been unconscious for 15 hours. He was not dead. What happened next? What Beck Weathers did in the hours that followed? What his body refused to accept? What his mind reached for in the darkness? Is one of the most medically inexplicable survival stories in the history of human beings attempting to climb the world's highest mountain. This is the UnlostFiles, and this is the true story of Beck Weathers. To understand what Beck Weathers was doing on the upper slopes of Mount Everest in May of 1996, you need to understand who Beck Weathers was, and more specifically, who he was trying not to be. He was 49 years old, pathologist from Dallas, Texas. A man who, by his own account in the years after this story, had spent much of his adult life in a fog of clinical depression so heavy and so persistent that the mountain, any mountain, had become the one place where the fog lifted, where the physical demand of the climb was so total that his mind had no room left for the darkness that followed him everywhere else. Climbing was not a hobby for Beck Weathers. It was the medication that worked when nothing else did. In 1996, he joined the adventure consultants expedition led by Rob Hall, one of the most accomplished high-altitude guides in the world, a New Zealander with 5 successful Everest summits and a reputation for bringing clients home safely. The expedition was commercial. Clients paid for the expertise, the equipment, the logistics of an Everest attempt. Beck had paid. He had trained. He had every reason to believe this was his year. There was one problem he had not fully disclosed at the time of joining. Before leaving for Nepal, Beck had undergone a surgical procedure called radial keratotomy, a correction for nearsightedness that was common in the era before laser surgery. The procedure had worked well at sea level. What Beck did not know, what no one had told him, or what he had not fully processed, was what happens to that correction at extreme altitude. As the human body ascends into thin air, atmospheric pressure drops. That drop in pressure affects every gas-filled space in the body, including the eye. For Beck Weathers, the specific geometry of his corneas, altered by the surgical incisions, responded to the reduced pressure by changing shape. Not dramatically, not visibly, just enough to destroy his vision. By the time he reached the balcony at 8,400 meters on summit day, a narrow shelf of snow and ice used as a rest point on the southeast ridge route, Beck Weathers was functionally blind. Rob Hall made the only decision available to him. Beck would wait at the balcony while the rest of the team continued to the summit. When they returned, they would bring him down. It was a reasonable plan. It assumed a reasonable day. May 10, 1996 was not a reasonable day. The storm that hit Everest on the afternoon of May 10th was not a surprise in the way that some disasters are surprises. Completely without precedent, impossible to predict. The signs had been there. The weather window that season was narrow, and the upper mountain had been showing instability for days. What was not predicted was the speed of the deterioration, the rate at which a manageable weather situation became a catastrophe. Beck waited at the balcony for more than 10 hours. 10 hours at 8,400 meters, without supplemental oxygen after his ran out, in wind that arrived without warning and with temperatures that a thermometer at that altitude would have struggled to register. He was alone. The other members of the team who had turned back earlier had passed him and continued down. The summiting group had not yet returned. He sat in the snow, wrapped in his down suit, and waited because those were his instructions and because he had no functional vision to attempt anything else. When the storm hit, it hit the entire mountain simultaneously. Guides and clients from multiple expeditions found themselves scattered across the upper slopes in conditions that reduced visibility to the reach of a gloved hand. The descent route, marked by fixed ropes on the technical sections, but largely unmarked on the wider snowfields, became impossible to follow. A group of 11 climbers, including Beck, eventually found each other on the South Col, a flat, exposed plateau at approximately 7,900 meters. They were unable to locate Camp 4, which was somewhere on that same plateau in the same storm, invisible. They huddled together on the ice and waited for the storm to pass or for dawn, whichever came first. The storm did not pass. Several members of the group managed to reach camp through luck and proximity. Others remained on the col through the night. Beck Weathers was among those who did not move. By the time the storm eased in the early hours of May 11th, Beck had been exposed on the open col for the better part of a night at -40°C with wind speeds that mountain weather data later estimated at over 110 kilometers per hour. When Stuart Hutchison, a Canadian climber on the expedition and a physician, went out to assess the people left on the col that morning, he found Beck alongside Japanese climber Yasuko Namba. Both were encased in ice. Both were unresponsive to voice or touch. Both had breathing so shallow it was nearly imperceptible. Hutchison examined them as thoroughly as conditions at 7,900 meters permitted. He had medical training and experience with altitude. He knew what he was looking at. He walked back to camp and told the team that Beck Weathers and Yasuko Namba were beyond rescue, that attempting to bring them in would cost the rescuers their own lives for no possible benefit, that they were, for all medical purposes, already dead. He was following the unwritten law of high-altitude mountaineering. When the mathematics of survival make rescue impossible, you do not sacrifice the living for the dead. Beck Weathers lay in the ice on the South Col and was counted among the dead. What happened inside Beck Weathers between the hours of that morning and approximately 3 in the afternoon of the same day is not something medicine can fully account for. The core body temperature required to produce the depth of hypothermia that Hutchison observed, the stillness, the ice crust, the absence of response, is a temperature at which the brain should not be capable of generating the kind of electrical activity required for consciousness. There is no mechanism in standard hypothermic physiology that explains what Beck Weathers did at approximately 3 o'clock on the afternoon of May 11, 1996. He opened his eyes. He was face down in the snow. He was alone. The storm had eased to a degree that allowed him to see, dimly, imperfectly, but enough. His right hand, extended in front of him, was the color and texture of old wood. Black, completely frostbitten to the wrist. He registered this without what he later described as any particular emotional response. The hand was gone. He understood that. What was not gone was the question of whether the rest of him would follow. He later said that what came to him in that moment was his wife's face. Peach Weathers, her name, her specific face, arriving in his consciousness with a clarity that everything else in his field of vision lacked. And behind that, his children, the specific, irreducible fact of them. People who needed him to get up. He got up. This is the sentence that, when you know the full context of what preceded it, does not seem possible. He had been unconscious in -40 degrees for 15 or more hours. His core temperature had dropped to levels that produce cardiac arrhythmia, organ failure, brain damage. His right hand was lost. His face was frostbitten in ways that were not yet visible to him, but that would eventually require reconstruction so extensive that surgeons would spend months growing a new nose on his forehead before implanting it. He got up. He stood in the snow on the south col of Mount Everest, barely able to see, one hand frozen to uselessness, no guide, no rope, no instructions beyond the faint shapes of tent structures somewhere across the flat white expanse of the col, and he walked toward them. The accounts from inside Camp 4 described the tent flap opening and a figure entering that several witnesses initially did not recognize as human. He was ice-covered, shuffling, his face wrong in ways that took a moment to process. Someone identified him. Someone got him into a sleeping bag. Someone gave him water and supplemental oxygen. He was alive. He had walked back from where medicine had left him. And then the storm came back. During the night of May 11th, the wind returned with enough force to destroy the tent where Beck had been placed. By morning, he was again exposed, again covered in snow, again in the extreme cold that had already, by any medical logic, killed him once. When climbers went to check on him that morning, what they found appeared to confirm what they had expected. The tent was destroyed, and inside it, Beck Weathers was still, motionless, ice-covered. One of the climbers began to close Beck's sleeping bag over his face. Beck Weathers said, "I don't think that's a good idea." The exact phrasing varies across accounts. Some record it as those words, others as something similar in substance. What every account agrees on is that the man who had been declared dead the previous morning, who had gotten up and walked to camp on a frostbitten hand and near-zero vision, who had then been exposed a second time through the night in the storm, was speaking. He was conscious. He was coherent. He was, for the second time in 24 hours, alive when no calculation suggested he should be. Getting Beck Weathers off Everest required a sequence of decisions and actions that pushed the limits of what was logistically possible on the world's highest mountain. Other survivors helped him to his feet and began assisting him down through the Lhotse face, a steep, exposed section of the descent that under normal conditions requires technical competence and full physical capacity. Beck Weathers had neither. He descended partially under his own power and partially supported, one arm useless, vision limited, in the condition of a man whose body had been through something that the other climbers could see on his face and hands even through their own exhaustion. He reached Camp 2 at approximately 6,500 meters. The decision was made to attempt a helicopter rescue, something that, at that altitude, was at the extreme boundary of what helicopter technology and Himalayan conditions permitted. The air at 6,500 meters is thin enough that helicopter rotors produce a fraction of the lift they generate at sea level. The landing zone was a narrow, sloped area of glacier. A single failed approach could end in a crash that would kill the pilot and turn a rescue into a second disaster. Madan Khatri Chetri, a Nepalese army pilot, flew 2 separate missions into the mountain that day, the second one specifically for Beck. The approach required him to fly a fully loaded helicopter at the edge of its operational ceiling, set it down on a glacier at altitude, and get back out. He did it. Beck Weathers was evacuated from the mountain. The hospital in Kathmandu that received Beck Weathers was not equipped for what had been done to his body by Everest. The damage required assessment before it required treatment. The extent of the frostbite, the state of his organs, the neurological impact of the hypothermic episodes. The right arm was amputated below the elbow. The damage was so complete and so irreversible that there was no surgical option that preserved the limb. The fingers of his left hand were amputated as well. All of them, leaving a partial hand that would require months of rehabilitation to become functional in any meaningful sense. His nose had frozen completely. The tissue had died. The reconstruction that followed was, at the time, among the more extensive facial surgeries performed in that context. Surgeons used tissue from his ear and his forehead, growing a new nasal structure on his forehead, allowing it to develop its own blood supply over months, before eventually repositioning it where his nose had been. Beck Weathers returned to Dallas. He retired from medicine. The pathologist who had spent his career examining what death does to the body had, in a specific and personal way, examined it from the other side. He began giving talks, not motivational speeches in the polished, packaged sense, talks about what had actually happened on that mountain, about the depression that had driven him up it in the first place, about what it cost his family to receive the phone calls they received on May 11th and May 12th of 1996, telling them different things each time. His wife Peach had been told at one point that he was dead. She had not accepted that. When Beck describes his resurrection on the call, the moment of his wife's face arriving in his consciousness in the snow, and you know that on the surface, many thousands of meters below, Peach Weathers was refusing to release her husband to the mountain. There is something in the symmetry of that which resists easy explanation. He has said that he does not know what brought him back, that medicine does not have a satisfying answer, that he has stopped needing one. 11 people died on Everest during the events of May 10th and 11th, 1996. Rob Hall, the guide who had told Beck to wait at the balcony, died near the summit, caught in the storm on his descent, in radio contact with his pregnant wife in New Zealand until the transmissions stopped. Yasuko Namba, found beside Beck on the call that morning, did not wake up. Beck Weathers was declared dead twice and came home. The arithmetic of that doesn't work. The physiology of it doesn't work. The temperature, the exposure time, the absence of oxygen, the state in which he was found. None of it produces an outcome in which a man stands up, walks to camp, survives a second night of exposure, and then corrects someone who is in the process of closing a sleeping bag over his face. And yet, Beck Weathers is 76 years old. He lives in Dallas. He has a reconstructed nose and one arm and a partial hand, and he has given more talks than he can count about what it means to decide to come home from a place that has decided to keep you. In one of those talks, he was asked what he thought about when he stood up on the Colonel, when he chose, against everything his body and the mountain had already decided, to try. He said he thought about the fact that his children needed a father more than they needed an excuse. That's all it was. Not training, not willpower in the abstract, not the survival instinct as a biological imperative. Just the specific, concrete, undeniable weight of people who needed him to take one step, and then another, and then one more after that, until the tents were close enough to fall into. 2 declarations of death. One man walking home anyway. This has been the UnlostFiles. If this story did something to you, it should. The 1996 Everest disaster took 11 lives. And every one of those lives is part of this story, even when the headline carries only one name. Subscribe if this is the kind of story you want more of. Leave a comment with the moment that got you, because with this one, everyone stops somewhere different. I'll see you in the next one.